I welcome you, and I turn it over to Dr. Roberts.
Day after tomorrow, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences is going to issue a report about the state of the humanities in the United States, the sour state of the humanities. And I think one of the problems that the humanities and the liberal arts is facing is they haven't yet begun to look at their topics in terms of what psychedelics can contribute to understanding the human mind and their particular topics. So today I want to talk about the use of film criticism, using some ideas from psychedelics as an example of what we can really get into when we talk about that topic. Okay. Do you want to do it or shall I do it? Okay. I want to start off, I want to talk about movies and the way drugs have been portrayed in movies. Over on the upper right-hand corner, upper left-hand corner, you see several different versions of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And of course, this is the primary drugs are bad movie that's happened throughout the history of cinema. And below it is, does anybody recognize that young actor in the lower left-hand corner? Frank Sinatra, yes. Not only did he sing, but he also acted. And that was one of his films. And up in the right-hand corner is probably everybody's favorite anti-drug movie. What one is that? Reefer Madness, yes, right. And there's a drug-crazed pianist about to start hitting the keyboard. In the lower right-hand corner, we have a medical student who is studying for his exams. This is the type of cognitive enhancement that the movie shows, or in this period showed, and he's shooting himself up with amphetamines so he can study hard for the exams. Yeah, next one. Here are two more recent ones. Natalie Wood in Brainstorm, and we're making a transition now from drugs being entirely bad to drugs being questionably good but not quite as strong as they're going to get. And of course there's one of the Navi up in the upper right hand corner. I'm including them because what we see there is a combination of electronic technology, biotechnology, and psychedelics. And as you know, they can plug in their tails. And in the lower two pictures, we see pictures from the Matrix. In this case, we see Neo relaxing, or sitting in a chair, having taken a drug, and then having his nervous system plugged in to the electronics of the chair. So we're in a transition period here of looking at drugs from being all bad to being partially good. Let me say another thing that's happening along this time is that in movies that are science fiction movies or that use science, there's always the most dominant, exciting technology at the time being used. And if you think back of Nemo and the submarine that goes, under the water, or we look back at the chair of the movie where you sit in the chair and go backwards and forwards in time. This is very exciting, sort of Jules Verne, late 19th century technology. As we move to the 20th century, we start getting into technologies that are appropriate. As you know, there are a whole bunch of Japanese movies in which the atomic bomb has caused genetic disturbances, and we got all these wonderful creatures sort of coming over and destroying Tokyo and the rest of the city. So there's another example of technology being sort of updated in the movies. And the current technology that's being used, of course, is electronic, and we see that in the Matrix and lots of other places, but there's also psychotechnologies. These are the psychological methods of influencing the mind and of using the mind. And we've seen them go from the the dangerous, terrible technologies of Dr. Jekyll through these that are sort of mixed technologies, next one, to some where they're seen positively. In Inception and Limitless, psychotechnologies, drugs are used in order to increase the abilities of the people being shown in the movies. So what we're seeing here is a transition of drugs being all bad and now being seen as possibly good, and we're seeing a transition from the old sort of mechanical, electronic technology now transferring into the psychotechnologies. And this is a big cultural change that's going on. The movies are just, of course, an example of this, and there are plenty of TV shows that show this too. Here are two books if you're interested in following up on this. The one on the left, Psychotronic Encyclopedia, has, I guess, thousands of summaries of movies that have to do with psychology. Most of them are just really sort of dumpy, crazy movies. But what they do is they show that the human mind is a topic within the films. And the one on the right, the title says that all cocaine fiends and reefer madness is about drugs being the bad things in movies. And right now, I wonder, will there be a follow-up of this or start looking at drugs as positive in movies? Now, one of the big ideas in the humanities is this from Joseph Campbell, who wrote a book called Hero with a Thousand Faces. What he did is to read the world's mythology, legends, religions, and say if you put all these together, they're basically telling one story. And the story changes from hero to heroine, but it's always the same story of the hero or the heroine sort of living a nice, quiet life. Think of Bilbo Baggins in his nice, cozy home, being called on an adventure, at first not wanting to go, but then deciding to go. Then throughout the adventure being trapped and looks like he or she is going to be killed or something terrible will happen, fighting and getting through it, and often go back and forth between the second and third stage. And finally, at the very end of the movie, what we see is the hero or heroine emerging, being victorious, and bringing back something of value to his or her own life or to the village. Now this theme, this four-part theme, we're going to follow in Snow White. So let me just point out a few places to get used to it by looking at Pink Floyd The Wall. Whoops, let me say, read this first. Joseph Campbell, who wrote this very well-known and respected book in the humanities, got a copy of a book by Stanislav Grof. Grof is the world's leading researcher in the psychotherapeutic use of psychedelics. And in reading the book, he commented, he said, I have found so much of my thinking about mythic forms freshly illuminated by the findings reported here, that was the manuscript of Realms, that I am going to try to give the reader a suggestion that the types and depths of consciousness that Dr. Grof has fathomed in searching his inward sea. When you come across an idea and two people have from very different directions have sort of come into the same idea, that gives the idea a lot more credibility than it's all done by one bunch of people working in the same line. So we have Campbell reading the world's myths and symbols and coming up with this, the hero's story, and we have Grof doing psychedelic psychotherapy, coming up with a description of our minds, of the human psyche, and they turn out to be, in large part, the same story. Okay. Here's a copy of the first edition of Realms. It's been republished now as LSD, Doorway to the Numinous. They're the same book. So if you're interested in checking up on this, this is the LSD, Doorway to the Numinous is the book to get. Grof is the person standing, the taller person there. That's his wife, Christina. Next to them is Vaclav Havel and his wife, Dagmar Havel, the past president of the Czech Republic. Havel is one of the people who took Czechoslovakia through its rebirth into a democratic country, the Czech Republic. And Grof has been awarded a prize here called the Vision 95 Prize. The building they're in, by the way, you know Good King Wenceslas? This is the Church of Good King Wenceslas in Prague, and that's where the ceremony took place. Next one. Okay, here's Grof's view of the mind. There are four big levels, and we're going to see these briefly in Pink Floyd and in more detail in Snow White. So the first are the abstract and aesthetic, and that's what's going on in the person's life right at that time. The abstract meaning the perceptions, the aesthetic being the thoughts and perceptions. Below that is a psychodynamic, the personal history level. This is what most psychology pays attention to. It looks at what happened in the person's past that caused the person to be the type of person he or she is now. Below that is the perinatal level. It's not prenatal, it's perinatal. It means having to do with surrounding birth. And he says that if we go deep enough into our minds, we can actually get into remembering our own birth experiences, and psychedelics are one of the paths to get to that depth. And below that is the transpersonal level that goes beyond our personal experience. It goes beyond our self, beyond our particular time, and beyond a particular place. Okay, these pictures I got from this book on Pink Floyd, The Wall, and we'll briefly find those 4 levels in Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd is an incredibly rich film. If you really want to have a lot of fun analyzing a film in terms of Grof's view of the mind, Pink Floyd's The Wall is just beautiful in this. Okay, next one. Here we have what we'll call the hero Pink in a hotel room before a concert, and this is all his drug paraphernalia. He's really quite crazy, or on the edge of crazy, and the first lyric of the film lets us know that what we're doing is looking into his mind, into his psyche. If you'd like to find what's behind these cold eyes, you'll have to claw through this disguise. And the rest of the film portrays his mind and the events going on in his mind and back in his life, back and forth within the film. I think of him as sort of like ricocheting around his mind. He'll be in the perinatal level, and then the abstract, and then the transpersonal, then the autobiographical, and we'll see this going through the film. The next one. On the autobiographical level, we see his memories of his childhood during World War II. And there he is on the bottom one, playing with a plane bomb. London was bombed during this period, and we see a lot of destruction and death happening, including the death of his father, not in London, but in fighting. And the lyric that goes with this is talking about his father. They were all left behind, most of them dead, the rest of them dying, and that's how the high command took my daddy from me. Now what we're seeing here is, of course, his autobiographical level. Go to the next one. Over in the upper left-hand corner, I don't know if you can see it, that's his mother sitting in a lawn chair in a garden. Now what we've dropped down to now is the perinatal or birth-related level. And this has like 4 little stages in it. The first one is like the good womb. And at a deep level of our unconscious, we are aware of our life in the womb. And for most people, most of the time, it's a good womb experience. Not for everybody all the time, or not for some people at all, but most people, it's imagine yourself being very happy, well-fed, sitting in a hot tub or lying on a beach on a nice summer day with no problems taken care of. That's the BPM feeling. It's the feeling that counts. So there we have this beautiful backyard. To the right on the top, we have the beginning of the bombing of London. There's absolute exquisite cartooning in this. I don't know if there's a Nobel Prize for cartooning, but it ought to be by the guy Scaife, the guy who did this cartooning. It shows up throughout the film, particularly toward the end. And here we have one of the planes coming over. Underneath, you can see the outline of the city of London. That's Tower Bridge, those 2 little white things sticking up there. On the lower left side, we have some from the concert, and he's in this very sort of violent, Nazi-like band, which promotes violence. And this is BPM 3, basic perinatal matrix, the 3rd birth stage. And it has to do with struggle. And most movies have to do with BPM 3s. So the heroine is struggling. It might be a physical struggle, it might be a psychological struggle, it can be any kind of struggle, and probably being successful, then fighting again, and then being successful. And you see this throughout movies and TV shows. This is the real meat of most movies and TV shows. And over in the lower right-hand corner, we see the actual BPM 4, basic perinatal matrix 4, which is the birth experience. And in this case, he's breaking through the wall. This film doesn't have a lot on BPM 4, but at the end it shows it somewhat. And there he is breaking through. So this would be moving through the birth process from good womb to being trapped without being able to move through the birth canal, struggling through the birth canal, and then finally being born. Okay, here's a possible transpersonal level. At the end of the movie, we see some young boys who are cleaning up. It looks like it's after a bombing raid, and the scene is rather calm and clear. This is one of the little bit of transpersonal stuff that might be in here, and the lyric that goes with this is, all alone or in twos, the ones who really love you walk up and down outside the wall, some hand in hand. So we've taken a look now at a quick look at Pink Floyd The Wall in terms of Grof's structure of the human mind. Okay. Now, let's take a look at transpersonal. This is Grof's definition of transpersonal, and the three elements in it, they're going to show up, particularly when we look at Snow White in a couple of slides. So there are three ingredients in a transpersonal experience. One is going beyond the usual ego boundaries, that is identifying with something more than one's just bodily self, and going beyond the limitations of time. You go backwards and forward in time, or even step out of time, and space. So let's go on to the next one here. Now, if we think about the introduction to most myths and stories, it starts with this standard introduction on the right side. Once upon a time, a long time ago, in a far-off land, there lived a, and then whoever the character in the story happens to be. Those are the same items that appear in the transpersonal level as Grof describes them. So once upon a time, there's an extension of time in a far-off land, you know, beyond the usual land, and then we're given somebody else to identify with, a simple woodcutter, a beautiful princess, a wonderful knight, or so forth. And you know, if you listen to the news tonight, and the news starts off, once upon a time, you know immediately you're not talking about what's happening today in Washington and New York and Chicago, but that puts you in a mythopoetic state of consciousness, a state that myth and symbols come from and express and lead us into. Okay. Look out, read this, warning. So if you're afraid of having Snow White ruined for you, you know, leave now or close your eyes and ears. Okay, let's take a look at Snow White now. Here's an opening scene of Snow White. And what we're seeing here is the intrapsychic development of a pubescent girl. And we're going to see her going through the interior work, demands, threats that a young woman that age goes through, but it's told as if it's happening in the outside world. So while we're following the story of Snow White, what we're really looking at is a projection of her understanding and lack of understanding of herself as a person. So here's a beautiful castle. The castle often represents oneself. So this is a very idyllic castle. This is the one that's modeled after Mad Ludwig's castle in Bavaria, and the one that is used in Fantasyland. In the lower left-hand corner, see those sort of blobs that are red? Okay, those are Amanita muscaria mushrooms, one of the two types of psychedelic mushrooms. We will see them appear in a whole section of the movie after we get into the transpersonal level. So let's start into looking at Snow White. Oh, here we go, Once Upon a Time. We're not talking about regular reality here. We're talking about mythopoetic reality. Once upon a time, there lived a lovely Princess Snow White. There's somebody else to identify with, okay? And as we know, her vain stepmother wanted to be the most beautiful one of all, but Snow White was getting attractive. So let's go on to the next one. The first of Grof's levels, remember, is abstract and aesthetic. And we see a little bit of the movie here. And most TV shows and movies have a little introduction just so you know who the characters are. Of course, if you're watching a series of shows, then you already know who the characters are. So you can go right into the sense of being trapped and working out of the difficulty. So let's take a look at Snow White's introduction. There's the Queen, who, by the way, is modeled after Joan Crawford. I'd love to have known what Joan Crawford. The princess was Jean Tierney, a beautiful young woman who was in American and British movies at the time. So there's the Queen looking at herself in the mirror. Around the outside are the zodiac symbols. Of course, she wants to know, am I the most beautiful one of all? And she's used to hearing this. She is. Now the next one. But the mirror, of course, says, no, you're not. I read somewhere that when this was first shown in theaters, the face in the mirror was so scary, little kids ran screaming out of the theaters, and they had to sort of tone it down. It is scary even now, so if it was more scary, I'd love to, to see what it was. Okay, let's go on to the next. There's Snow White. She's supposed to be a scullery maid, which is a kitchen maid, but we have her here scrubbing the steps. Now, cleaning is often spoken of as looking at oneself, getting your act together, understanding yourself. And here she is, very downcast. She doesn't like doing this activity, Okay, and there's the prince outside who shows up, and of course here we're getting an introduction to one of the other characters. Next one. She looks down a well. Next one. That's the first time she sees the prince, is in the well. Now the well is a classic image of the unconscious. Okay, so the first time she runs across this imaginary handsome prince, okay, is of course looking into her own unconscious. And in Jungian psychology, this would be the anima, the womanly characteristic, seeing the animus, the male characteristic. And we all have anima and animus in us. So this would be beginning of self-exploration. And looking down the well is just classic image. Okay, Snow White is not ready for this, okay? Uh-oh. She runs into the house, into the castle rather. Next, but she's interested. Okay, let's say this is a 7th or 8th grade girl, okay? She's interested, but she doesn't know quite what to do about it. Next one. Okay, now we go into the biographical level. And again, this has to do with the person's individual history, and most psychology pays attention to this by asking the question, how did this person become this way because of what happened in the past? There's Joan Crawford looking out. She's not very happy about this at all. She wants to be the most beautiful one. So she sits on the throne and invites the huntsman to come in. Now, the huntsman is actually quite weak, and the queen is quite strong. The stereotypical male and female roles are reversed at this particular point. Now, reversed within this young woman's whose psyche we're looking at. And of course, the queen says, bring back Snow White's heart in this box. And now we're going to move to the third level, and we'll spend more time on this. I think the third level is especially rich for understanding our own lives, other people's lives, literature, movies, plays. I've had music students do analyses of music using BPM, so it's a very, very rich area. There's the Psychedelic Future of the Mind. That's an insert. Okay, that's the book that I have written about this in. And there's a particular chapter in there called "It's a Perinatal World," and I use the Grof's perinatal level to talk about Hitler and war, Sartre and Mescaline, and Snow White and Fight Club. So I'll be doing the Snow White bit today. Here's Grof's view of the birth process. He originally was going to be an artist and a cartoonist. And then somebody gave him a copy of Freud's The Psychopathology of Everyday Life, which was an illegal book to have in Czechoslovakia during the communist time, because Freud was Jewish, and it said that people are the way they are, not because of their economic location, but because of psychodynamic things that had happened in their life. So he went home that night and he said he sort of read it under the blanket with a flashlight and decided that right there to become a psychiatrist rather than a cartoonist. And there was a BPO1, the good womb. I don't know if you can see the fetus has a little smile on its face there. BPM2, contractions, but no movement yet through the BPM2. 3, movement through the birth canal, which is very rich in terms of imagery. And then finally, birth. So let's take a look at this so we see it in Snow White. There's the close-up. Okay. This is characterized psychologically with our primal union with mother, a sense of no cares, relaxed, easygoing. As I mentioned, sitting on the beach on a nice day or in a hot tub and everything just feeling great and you're feeling relaxed and no problems at all. That's the BPM1 feeling. So let's take a look at this where this shows up. The huntsman takes Snow White into the woods. Now we know the huntsman wants to cut her heart out, but she doesn't know that. So what counts is her position. Here she is in a beautiful forested glade, a nice sunny day, flowers are growing around. You know, just the type of day you'd love to have a picnic there. So this is her BPM1, and we know the huntsman is across the little gully there, not being a threat. Next one. She picks up a fledgling, puts it back in her nest. She is a fledgling out of her nest, but she doesn't know that yet. Next one. Now we start the contractions. This is being trapped with no sense of escape. The difference between BPM2 and BPM3 is in BPM2, it's hopeless. You can't get out of the situation. You're trapped. In BPM3, you're able to struggle. Okay, you can do something to get out of the situation. And if you look at your own experiences in life, you can probably spot times when you felt each one of these. And when you felt one of them, you remember all the other times you felt trapped and couldn't get out of it. Now, it doesn't have to be physically trapped, like being in an elevator or in a car. It can be trapped in a relationship, trapped in a job, anything where you feel there's no way to get out of the situation. So let's take a look at where this shows up. It's called antagonism with the mother. And this is the sense of contractions, feeling trapped, a situation endangering survival and bodily integrity, severe psychological traumatization, and rejection. Rejection is perfect for Snow White. Unbearable and inescapable situation. Let's see what you can't escape from. Uh-oh. Here he comes. Next one. Uh-oh. You don't want to meet this guy in a dark alley at night. There she is, trapped. She was really against a rock and a hard place. She's up against this big boulder, and Huntsman is coming down with a knife. So that's a beautiful BPM 2 situation. Next. He can't go through with it. Next. And he says, go, run. The queen wants to kill you. So she's able to do something now. See, she switches from being hopelessly trapped, being able to do something, and her doing something is escaping through the woods. It's called synergism with mother, and these are struggles, fights, adventurous activities. I mean, this sounds like most TV and movies. Intensifying suffering to cosmic dimensions, wild, adventurous, dangerous exploration, and the sense of dying and being reborn. So let's see this. There's beautiful cartooning in this. Disney did most of this cartooning himself. This originally came out in the fall of 1937, but it's mostly considered a 1938 film. So here she is. Want to go back a slide? Notice she's leaving the white, nice, clear area behind her and going into this deep, dark, threatening woods. Okay. Over on the left, you see there's a tree glaring down at her. Its arm is raised with a knife. Okay. And we'll see there and other places the tree's roots sort of reach out and grab her. The next one, see they're grabbing onto her. See over on the right, there's a terrible, frightening face looking at her. But she's able to go on. I mean, she has enough BPM3 energy to fight the situation. Next one. There they are grabbing her dress. Next one. Notice in the background, again, there are these terrible, frightening faces in the trees. Next one. There's a good close-up of it. Yes, next one. The glaring eyes. No, we're going to see the eyes appear a little bit later, but right now they're very threatening kind of eyes. You don't want to see this kind when you go home. Now, this is from the 1937 book. Each time the movie was released, it used to be released regularly. I think it was every 5 or 7 years, a new edition of the book would come out. And this is from the original edition. The editions have been Baudelarized, that is sort of toned down so they're not so parents don't think they're so scary to their children. But in the 1937 book, the text says, she ran, she fell over a log. Can we have the next one? She stumbled over a big root and fell. There was a roaring in her ears. She seemed to hear the huntsman cry, go, 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 but she could go no further. She was so miserable, she didn't care what happened. She wanted to lie there and die. And there's that theme of death, rebirth, or rather rebirth, dying and then rebirth. At this point, it's just seen as the death. Also, the new ones take out the dying part so that, kids won't be overly scared about it. Okay, next one. Now, those frightening eyes that we saw a couple slides ago up here, I don't have a slide of this, and they sort of turn into these nice, cuddly, round eyes of the squirrels and the bunnies and the chipmunks. So what had been frightening her before, she's grown enough to understand enough that these are just the animals. And she wakes up the next day, the next morning, and over on the far corner, mushrooms appear, and they start to appear often here along the tree. Now, I don't know whether Disney knew about psychedelic mushrooms. I think he did. If you have a chance, get a look at a very early Mickey Mouse cartoon called Mickey's Garden. In that cartoon, bugs are eating the insects. Minnie calls up Mickey to come and get rid of the insects. He has a a bug spray. I'm pretty sure it's Black Flag. I mean, in 1937, 1938, that was around. Black Flag is basically a concentration of nicotine. It's still for sale, by the way. Nicotine is a really good way to kill bugs and people. So anyway, he mistakenly inhales some himself and has a very psychedelic experience. And under Minnie's house, the house lifts up and there's a big red mushrooms with white dots on it. And then mushrooms start to appear in the garden afterwards. When I first started showing this, my students, who are mostly from the Chicago area, said that they had read an article in Rolling Stone that said that Disney was kicked out of the Art Institute as a student for doing drugs. Now, I don't know whether that's true or what it is, but anyway, there's that lead to follow up on. Okay, let's go to the next one. And here we're going now onto perinatal matrix 4, and this is the birth experience. So she's been through this terrible birth agony and now has been, sort of, in a sense, reborn in this beautiful morning, which represents the rebirth, the beginning of life, the beginning of time, so forth. So here we see separation from the mother, fortuitous escape from dangerous situations. Boy, that's just it. Grof also says natural scenes, dawn, beginning of spring, the feelings of rebirth, redemption, beautiful colors, appreciation of a simple way of life, occasional manic activity, we're going to see this in a couple of slides, and grandiose feelings. Okay, let's go. She asks her, I think these might be sort of intuitive and psychic abilities at this time. What am I going to do? Where can I go? And I'm all alone. Next slide. So they lead her, next slide, to this overlook. And there we see the dwarf's house in the background. In the lower left-hand corner, out of slides in this perspective, are some of the mushrooms that start to appear. So I'm thinking when she crosses that bridge, she's sort of crossing over into the deepest level of consciousness, the transpersonal level. So let's go on and see her there. Okay? Transpersonal, beyond the personal, or ego transcendence. And we see this in the house. Like, remember the castle was this big, gorgeous, powerful, beautiful place. Again, thinking oneself as being the dwelling place, and our bodies are the dwelling place of our psyches. And now she's moved into this humble woodcutter's house out in the woods. So she's having a sort of more realistic view of herself as she's growing up. She's cleaning and working on herself. A lot of business has to do with that. And then we'll see her going into even a deeper level of the unconscious as she goes to sleep and has other experiences. Let's go on. Here's an example of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. It's the one that's often used in children's stories. Of course, it's kind of the pretty mushroom. And if you're going to draw a children's story and put mushrooms in it, this would be likely the one that you'd use. Okay, there she's crossing the bridge. Notice the mushrooms at the base of the tree that she's going toward. Okay, she goes to the dwarf's house and cleans it off and looks in. And the raccoon over in the lower right-hand corner also does the same thing. I think this is the first instance of something that Disney uses again, and that's where an adult cleans off a window and a child will clean off next to it. There's one in 101 Dalmatians. You know, Mama Dalmatian cleans off the window, one of the little puppies cleans off. It's a beautiful little sort of, there's a lot of good cartooning in this that sort of picks up themes that appear later on in Disney's work. So, here she's looking in the, and here we go. This is the famous whistle while you work, okay, manic activity. And of course, cleaning oneself represents doing psychotherapy at the same time. So you're sort of cleaning out your psyche, and as the house representing her, she's maturing and cleaning out her psyche at the same time that to us, it looks like she's just doing the house. There's a lot of fun cartooning in this. Next one. Here she is, whistle while you work. Da, 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 da. Oh, she's tired at this point, right? She's been working hard all day. So she goes upstairs, goes to bed, in the dwarf's bed. Meanwhile, okay, the dwarves are in a jewel mine. They're not in an iron mine or a coal mine or a copper mine, it's a jewel mine. And jewels, particularly in Hindu psychology, represent levels of spiritual development in the chakras. The way I got into this is I was attending a conference at the Menninger Foundation, and we're talking about the number 7, and one of my dinner companions said, you know, the 7 dwarfs in Snow White represents the 7 chakras. And I happened to come back, and what was showing at the theater in DeKalb but Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. So I went to see the 7 chakras, and in my class we were using Grof's book, Realms of the Human Unconscious. And suddenly I saw the movie like really fits. Of course, there's always a possibility, not that the movie fits, but that my thinking makes the movie fit. We all have to be careful of, you know, of doing that. So let's take a look at, here they are down in the mine. We dig, 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 dig. We dig the whole day through, and here they are coming back home. Notice the lower left-hand corner, the mushrooms. Go back a slide. This is the part of the song the people don't sing. Hi ho, it's home from work we go. The next day it's off to work. But we all know the off to work one, but it's home from work we go. Okay, there they are, the 7 chakras going back. The 7 chakras in Hindu psychology represent levels of psychological and spiritual development. And one of the things we do in class is to imagine that each of the dwarves represents one of the levels of spiritual development. Dopey, of course, is the lowest level. Doc is the highest level. And Sneezy is the lungs. So this is another possible. This is an interpretation. Surely Disney didn't have this in mind. Okay, next one. Grof was in Czechoslovakia, and I showed him this presentation, and I told him, Stan, the reason you're interested in psychedelics is your mother was frightened by a postage stamp once when she was carrying you. He said, not very likely. But the Eastern European countries are much more open to mushrooms than the Western European countries, except for a few mushrooms being used in French cooking. But the Eastern European countries, I should say had, not have, because I don't know, have mushroom series of stamps. Like we might have bird and flowers and trees, and they'll have mushrooms, and they always include the psychedelic mushrooms. Okay, next one. Well, the dwarves come home. And there's this funny business. She's covered with sheets. They think she's a dragon. They think she's a ghost. And finally said, oh, it's a little girl. Next one. So she starts to nourish her chakras. The chakras, these very deep parts of her mind. And she's cooking for them. Next one. They attack it like a bunch of Cub Scouts coming in after school. Boy, you know, free food, may cook for them on the table. Next one. Next one. Not till you're washed up. They've never heard of such a thing. Here they are at the trough. You notice only 6 of them there? We'll see a little into it. And this is the brrr song, washing song. And so in order to be nourished, they have to wash themselves, which of course is more cleaning. Okay, next one. Grumpy doesn't want anything to do with this. You know, he's the adrenals. We're sort of aggressively grumpy. But they pick him up. Next. Next. Even Grumpy gets cleaned. Okay, next. This is from one of the books. I think this is a 1960s book. That night they're singing and dancing, and she's sort of getting to know this very deep level of her unconscious, and they're getting to know her. Next. There's the drummer, Dopey, playing In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, whacked out of his mind. That's the drummer. The next day, okay. Even Grumpy gets a little kiss on the forehead. Next. Bye-bye. Hi-ho, it's off to work we go. Okay, they've gone back to the mine the next day. Okay. She decided to bake gooseberry pies. And all her little intuitive and psychic abilities are all lined up there. Pretty organized unconscious at this point. Next. But we've still got the queen. Okay, the queen that represents the undesirable shadow aspect of this girl's personality that we're looking at has not been resolved yet. It's still back there in the castle. So the witch, who becomes a hag, a peddler, and the ugliest one of all, represents the part of the personality that we don't like to admit, called our shadow. Next. You don't want to run to this castle on a rainy night in Transylvania. It's the same castle, but look at the difference from that first wonderful, glorious white castle up on the precipice to this kind of threatening one. Next. It's not Snow White's heart. She asks the mirror, where is Snow White? And the mirror tells her, living with the dwarfs. She goes down into her very deep, unpleasant part of her unconscious, the dungeon. Okay, and here the shadow aspect of this young girl's personality we're looking at is beginning to express and feel and act out her shadow, the unlikely, the undesirable part of her. And there's beautiful cartooning here. See the rats, there's a skeleton hanging there by the staircase. Next. There's a chemical lab. Next. She gets out above. Notice on the left there's a beautiful little balance made of a skeleton holding the two trays. Next. The peddler's disguise. So, mummy dust. A friend of mine who's a pharmacologist says that those symbols are actually alchemical symbols. They represent, a pinch of this and a grain of that, and said that an alchemist actually knows what the amounts are in the left-hand column. Next. She's mixing up this peddler's disguise drink. Holds it up to the light. Lightning strikes. There's a common expression of psychedelics is electronized chemicals, in the sense they make you feel sort of electric energy within your nervous system. This, again, is one of the books. She drinks it. Next. She's caught in a vortex. The vortex, the whirlpool, is often an image of BPM 2 being trapped, no way out. You just, next. Her hands start getting old. Next. Choking is another typical BPM 2 situation. There is a bad trip. Okay, that's it right there. And next. I'm the most beautiful one of all. See, she's turned into exactly what she doesn't want to be. Okay, so bringing up that part of her personality. The ugly witch, hag, peddler. Next, she has to make something to get Snow White. So one taste of the poisoned apple and the victim's eyes will close forever in the sleeping death. Not death, sleeping death. We call it deep coma. Next, the victim of the sleeping death can be revived by love's first kiss. Okay, next one. So she dips the apple in this potion. A beautiful red delicious. Looks gorgeous. Next. And she shows up at the dwarf's house and tries to tempt Snow White, who senses something's wrong about this. This old lady who showed up. See, she's terrified. The birds and the animals are terrified and running away. Next. See, the bluebird is bombing the peddler, and Snow White is looking like, well, maybe I shouldn't do this. I don't know. Next. The birds drive the witch peddler shadow away. Next. She feigns a heart attack. Now, Snow White, being a good person, has to help. Okay? Even though this is a dangerous, suspicious-looking character, she has to help. So she invites the witch into the house, who gives her the apple, and says, my dear, if you eat this, your favorite wish will come true. Your wish, of course, now is not to see Prince Charming again. All right. So, look out, Snow White. Clunk. She's out on the floor. Meanwhile, back at the jewel mine, the birds and the animals are coming to bring the dwarves back. All right? And they can't figure out what has happened to the birds and animals. What's going on here? Next one. Next. Sleepy figures it out. So Sleepy, this guy who's sort of not much aware of what's going on, has been a little more alert by the cleaning and the exercise of the previous night. So the chakras are all improved somewhat by Snow White's taking care of that part of her personality. He said, maybe something's happened to Snow White. Next, Snow White! Next. And they gallop through the forest. See the mushrooms in the lower left-hand corner? They gallop through the forest to save Snow White. In case you're wondering where the forest is, it's in Poland. That's one of the Polish psychedelic mushroom stamps. Mushrooms in the lower right-hand corner. It starts to rain. The peddler, witch, shadow leaves, thinking she's gotten rid of Snow White. The dwarves chase her up a cliff. She's about to leverage down a huge boulder. She says, "I'll crush the little man." And what happens? Lightning strikes. That rescue from without is a sort of typical transpersonal event. It might be a magic amulet or something somebody says, but there's some sort of magic that interferes at this point. Next. Oh, let me say, the slide after this, we actually don't see the witch dead, but we see two vultures, flying around, so we know she's dead. Meanwhile, back at the dwarf's house, they think she's dead because it appears dead. So they've lost their wonderful Snow White. Next. And all the bunnies and all the deer cry and all the birds cry. Very sad scene. They put her in a glass casket and put her out in the woods. Next. Who should arrive with this big white animus in hand but Prince Animus? He's been out having adventures with his horse in the woods. So here he is coming. Remember, the anecdote is love's first kiss? Aha, okay. Let's see what happens. Nothing happens. Okay. Love's first kiss didn't work. Well, it takes a little more. Oh, there. She's finally waking up now. Good. Whoa, look at that. They're all just astounded. Next. And the chipmunks and the birds and the raccoons are all delighted too. So Snow White is suddenly back. See, here's again that rebirth scene. Next slide. He carries her off, puts her on his horse. They ride off into the woods to the beautiful golden castle in the sky, representing sort of spiritual and psychological fulfillment. Next one. Even clearer shot. This is the HD view of it. Next, and that's the end. Okay, next slide. So what we've seen is Joseph Campbell's idea of view into that myths, symbols, and in our case Snow White, looks into the depths where obscure resistances are overcome and long lost, forgotten powers are revivified to be made available for the transformation of the world. And so we've seen that psychological process as described with Snow White and probably a pubescent girl sort of going into womanhood. Any questions, comments? Have you spotted some of your own BPMs? Yes?
My question is about the archetypes of this, and if what we know about Disney's biography, his personal background. You say that he had some history of use of substances. What do we know? What's been documented?
I don't know. I haven't read any biographies of Disney, so I can't give you that. Now, he was in Hollywood in a time when there are a lot of psychoactive drugs, and they show up in sort of like movies that have shown up here and there. There was, particularly in Hollywood in the teens and 20s, there was a lot of use of opium and cocaine. Now, I don't know whether Disney did it or not. It's hard for me to believe he didn't. But, of course, any biography you read of him that's an official biography is a very clean biography. Now, one of the problems that he came up, of course, with Fantasia, if you've seen that, the first 4 items have 4 psychoactive drugs in them. They're mushrooms, morning glories. Alcohol appears later, that with the hippopotamuses getting drunk, and I've forgotten what the 4th one is. So people are sort of wondering. I mean, are we interested in drugs because Disney, when we were young, sort of, got us thinking in that direction? Well, that's a sort of a funny idea, but they are worked into that era in his movies, and do try to get hold of Mickey's Garden. In the collection I have, which is an old VCR collection, it's like the first collection. There are 3 tapes on it. I suppose there's a DVD version of it now. It's online? Oh, great. Okay, good, yes. And so it's really fun. And when you realize what you're looking at, and Pluto also gets dosed with the black flag insecticide too, and you'll see a lot of good funny stuff in that. Yeah. Yes. Other comments, questions. Yes?
Just curious about the transpersonal realm. Your description talked about the alteration of time, self, and space, but are there different stages of the transpersonal realm? And you mentioned a void or a sleep in the Snow White film. I guess I'm wondering, are there different levels of this transpersonal realm?
Some people think there are different levels, and some people think there are like a number of different sort of like rooms in the house that aren't necessarily in a sequence. And this is one of the areas of transpersonal psychology that people are discussing, and it's not resolved. I mean, some people think they resolve it, some people think they resolve it the other way. So, yeah, but that's right. And the transpersonal area is a huge area, and the fact that we can reach this in our minds, it doesn't have to be through psychedelics. In fact, usually it's not. But yeah, it's available through all kinds of different ways. But that's Grof's big contributions. Well, at least two of them. One are their discovery of this perinatal level. And of course, Ronchian psychology has looked at this level already. And then the transpersonal level in Jungian psychology has largely looked at that level. And one of the Grof's big advantages is that he takes, like Freudian and Ronchian and Freudian and Jungian psychology and sort of puts them together in the same map. So it's like a unified theory. But there's still, and it leaves out a lot of sort of, the current thing, of course, is cognitive psychology. And there are whole psychedelic approaches to cognitive psychology that suggest psychedelics can be used sometimes as cognitive enhancers. Yes.
So, Tom, do you think we're evolving to a new mind-body hero? Is that kind of...
Oh, yes. Picking up on Campbell's idea of the hero and his idea that the book he wrote calls The Hero with a Thousand Faces, means if you collect all these heroes and heroines, it's the same story told with different leading characters. And what I'm suggesting is that as we're moving into the 21st century, the 21st century version of the hero is someone who explores the human mind. And a lot of people feel and felt that way, let's say, historically about, let's say, Timothy Leary. Okay, and some feel that way now about Stan Grof. So that the current hero is investigating his or her own mind and the human mind in general, not just, going to Africa or climbing a mountain or that sort of thing. But we're into a mind-body hero. And those movies like Inception and Limitless are sort of picking up on that theme. And I think we're moving in that direction as more and more people and the culture in general get familiar, first with different mind-body states, and second with different mind-body states brought about by psychoactive substances and or other psychotechnologies. A psychotechnology is a way of producing a mind-body state, also called state of consciousness. I use the word mind-body state because consciousness is too ambiguous. So the discovery and exploration of different mind-body states. All the great work that's going on in meditation and yoga and breathing techniques are also part of this. So there are a lot of different psychotechnologies. The psychoactive drugs are like one piece of the psychotechnology pie, and psychedelics are a narrow piece of that small piece. There's an enormous sort of interest in the nature of the human mind. Cognitive enhancement gets on this. It's not just, can I learn to do better in my test, but are there ways of solving problems? And the mind-body hero then is, I think, emerging as a 21st century version of the hero, just as earlier ones were, soldiers and warriors and so forth. Yeah, thanks. That's the theme I want to get across. And, of course, this is where I think the American Academy of Arts and Sciences is missing the boat, because psychedelics, still have a bad rep. And so, if you're a literature teacher, you're not likely, although there are a few who are now looking at the effect of psychedelics on literature. Music, of course, there's no question about music. And art, a smaller, but still no question about art. And then what I'm thinking of is that the psychedelics are missing in the humanities and the liberal arts. So this is one step to try to interest people in those fields and looking at the implications of psychedelics for their own particular field. In that chapter I mentioned, called Hitler and the Rhetoric of War, the Stan Grof and another historian of psychology of history have looked at the language that's used as people are prepared, countries prepared to go to war. And it's almost always the same perinatal language that's used. We used to have a beautiful, warm, wonderful culture. This terrible thing happened, 9/11, okay? And now we're in a struggle against terrorists, okay? With the hope that someday we'll be back in this sort of a nice, warm period again. And the guy who wrote this, his name is DuPage, started with Alexander the Great and went through Hitler and picked out time and time again when this rhetoric of birth was used. And it's often used in trying to get people to do things. You have fun watching ads on TV around and try to spot, you know, this sort of ad. You know, let's say insurance. You never say what you're going to say. What if something should happen to you? Okay. Okay. The way to get out of this, the action to take, the BPM to do is buy insurance. So after you're gone, your wife won't have to go out and be a bag lady and your kids can go to college. Okay, see, there's the BPM sequence. That's all. And as long as people don't recognize this, we're susceptible to it. And if you're watching late night television and some bikini-clad babe comes on and wants to sell you a monkey wrench, you know that you laugh at it. I mean, that's a sort of bald thing to do. But you know, if we have a BPM sequence, okay, people are not likely to recognize it. I'm working, actually, right now I'm working on interpreting Martin Luther's hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." And that is a nice BPM sequence. And of course, Easter is, I mean, the BPM thing in Christianity, right? It's beautiful. It just fits it beautifully. Start off with Palm Sunday and get finally with resurrection. You know, that's BPM story. And what Campbell found, looking at the world's myths and religions, he spent 7 years basically reading everything he could out of the Columbia University Library and came up with this hero's journey idea. What he says, if you look at the world's religions, time and time again, they have this BPM sequence told in their own culture and social milieu of the times, but that's the theme that's there. And you start looking for this stuff, and the question always is, am I projecting my own thoughts sort of into this, and how much is there? It's fun to look at literature this way, or movies. I mean, watch the news tonight. I mean, you find BPM stuff all over. It won't necessarily be in order. Remember, in Pink Floyd The Ball, I mentioned the hero, we'll call him Pink, there's ricochets around between the various levels of his consciousness. I mean, that's the way we experience life. In order to teach it, it's helpful to put it in these 4 sequential stages, but our life doesn't happen in that 4 stage all the time. So you can spot BPM 2 and 3 and 4, you know, all over the place. Was there a question? Yes.
I noticed you said there's like 4 basic levels of human psychology, like aesthetic and personal, transpersonal, all that. And I've been reading this book, Frequency by Penny Pierce, and I noticed that there's also basically 4 basic states of brainwaves, being beta the highest, alpha, theta, and delta going into lower states of consciousness. And as you go lower into consciousness, like as you said, it goes from being like aesthetic and personal to beyond time and space. And I've also been hearing a lot lately about possibly using sound waves as a way of channeling your brain's natural energy to do so. And this term psychotechnology keeps being thrown around, and I was wondering if you've maybe heard anything about research into that subject.
Let me say, you've just got 2 very good doctoral dissertations there. One with music and one with brain waves and the psychological aspects of it. I know people have looked at that. I don't know of any good research in that area. There's a woman named Jean Millay who quite a few years ago got a sort of 4 levels of clear plexiglass with rough holes built in them and lights coming in from the side, so that, you know, like the red light would light up the red holes you know, on that level and so forth. And she would then have somebody do a cranial or feedback of the brain waves. And as they would go through, the different lights would light up, and they try to get people like to turn on all the reds or turn on all the blues or stuff like that. Jean Millay was her name. But I thought it would be a fascinating area to look at.
Right.
Great, two good ideas, at least two. But, yes?
Do you see possibly the massive shift in psychology throughout humanity based on the use of psychedelics? People waking up? And if yes, do you think it'll happen for our species to wake up?
Yes and yes, although I always have to say, how much am I projecting my own hopes into that scenario? But the research that's being done, you're going to hear from Bob and Bruce about some of the research that's being done in psychotherapy. I think is going to be the door to not just medical and psychotherapeutic use of psychedelics, but also the cultural use. And then psychedelics are one door to a much larger field, and that's the of producing different mind-body states or states of consciousness. And psychedelics are just one little opening to this, but there are lots of other states that can be produced. Now, here's an interesting idea. Most psychotechnologies, let's say meditation, breathing techniques, jogging, you know, all the active drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, they're usually often used one at a time. What happens if we do a systematic combination of them and put them together into different sequences or different recipes? So what would a recipe of, let's say, sensory isolation, psychedelics, and a certain type of music produce? Now, in physics, we have the synthetic elements, the stuff that they make at Fermilab and stuff like that. In chemistry, we have synthetic chemistry. We now have this really, if I were going to college now, I think I'd go this direction, synthetic biology. And you're not stuck with the biology you were given, but you can actually sort of make things by moving biological pieces around. For example, there's a type of yeast that's been developed at Harvard that develops a precursor to LSD. Okay, so you can do synthetic biology. Now, what about synthetic mind-body states? Can we develop a mind-body state or mind-body states that haven't been produced before? And just like we can do different things with synthetic chemicals, all the plastics are synthetic, okay? Can we do different things with our minds by constructing different mind-body states? So there'll be like mind-body designers or architects or artists or something like that. And since everything we do is sort of an expression of the mind-body state we're in, like whatever state you're in now, you're listening to me and thinking as a product of that state. If we produce mind-body states that have not been produced before, will we then produce human abilities that have not been produced before? See, this is the big. I mean, I think this is the direction we're going in. Now, whether we're going to get there or when, I'm very bad at predictions, okay? But this is clearly the direction that is going. And all the great stuff that's going on in biotechnologies, you know, just incredible stuff. And in fact, we are not stuck with the brains we have. Okay, we can change our brains. Okay, one of the more interesting things, I have a sort of real speculative chapter in this book. I'd say it's like sort of like fiction. There's a problem of some children who are born with small brains and they won't, small craniums, the brain, and it won't grow. They close too early, and the people are stuck with small heads. And now they're developing ways of overcoming that process so that the fissures don't quite sort of glue together so fast, and they're able. It isn't entirely solved, but they're working in that direction from several different directions. Now, if it's possible to delay the closure of the cranium for people who have this disease, is it possible to delay the closure of the cranium for ordinary babies? And if our heads were like 1/16 of an inch larger, that's a huge number of neurons in there. I don't want to do it with my kids. I think it's really, okay. Okay, but that's one of the directions that can develop. They're just amazing things. And psychedelics are extremely powerful. You can use them all over the place to think about things, to solve various psychotherapeutic problems. And it's just one of this whole raft of things that's coming along. And the whole area of nanotechnology combined with biotechnology and psychoactive drugs is going to do amazing things. I have no idea. One of the things I don't like about being old is not going to see what's going to happen. Now maybe if I lived, I'd say, oh, I wish I hadn't. But you know, your kids, you're going to see things I'm not going to, and your kids are going to see things that you and I can't even think about. You know, and I think these are some of the possibilities that are going on. So one of the things I'm interested in, I'm trying to get the humanities people to start thinking along these lines. Okay, of the human brain and the human skull is not a given. Okay, it can be changed, it can grow. All right, there are all kinds of things that can be done to it, and not just disease things. And who knows what's going to be done on this? For example, in genetic technology, okay? I mean, the genes tell us what to construct and where to construct it and all that kind of stuff. Suppose we put genes together in a new way that produces a new receptor site on nerves, then there would be new things that would plug into those nerves. This is a really crazy idea. Anybody want to write some science fiction? Boy, this field is just crawling with ideas, okay? To develop new receptor sites and then have new chemicals that plug into those receptor sites and do different things with brains. It sounds crazy, but the research is leading in that direction. Research usually goes in 3 steps. The first is sort of a scientific insight where you discover something. And the next move is you use that scientific insight in the pharmacology areas to overcome a disease or a condition or something of that sort. And then the third one is you have that knowledge and you carry it off to do something entirely new with it. Like when movies were developed, they put the camera in the middle of the 12th row and they shot a play. And that was a movie, right? And along came D.W. Griffith and how many thousands of technique guys after that who've done all this other stuff that we do. Okay, so I mean we're at the stage of, you know, of medicine, of chemical psychotechnology, of just shooting the play that's going on. Okay, but we can change the play. How are we doing? Oh, my time's up. Thank you.